Tonight, we are honored to have as our guest, and I'm so pleased to introduce to you an Emmy Award-winning, world-renowned journalist who has embraced his role as one of the leading advocates for the Huntington's community and who is creating his own legacy. Please join me in welcoming Charles Sabine.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Meghan, for those extremely kind and generous words, and thank you so much for inviting me to be here tonight. It really is an extraordinary honor and a privilege to be here to speak to this esteemed audience. So, when I first met Nancy Wexler in Lisbon in 2008, how many pharmaceutical companies do you think were exploring treatments for Huntington's disease? The answer is zero, absolutely none, big fat zero. And I'll come back to that number a little bit later. That meeting in 2008, 2 years after the moment that I discovered that the disease that took my father and uncle and was inflicting on my brother the same terrible decline in his prime will take me too. The neurologist who gave me the test result of that genetic test said, "There's nothing you can do about this disease, so just live your life as well as you can." I was in my third decade with NBC News then, with tours in Iraq dominating my life. But I decided to change path dramatically, to take on the disease, to really mess it up before it did the same with me, with the same commitment of the suicide bombers that were all around me, a commitment which only someone with certainty of their fate can possess. So, I swapped war zones for the much more difficult battlefield, countering the prejudice surrounding this disease. It was a tough challenge. Everywhere I looked, there was stigma, ignorance, misdiagnosis, misunderstanding. Families like mine, I discovered all over the world, feeling that they were no part of humanity, hiding the disease away because of their desperate fears and shame. That new mission brought me into contact with people involved in every imaginable sphere of HD, researchers, clinicians, students, patients, families, carers, pharmaceutical companies, politicians, and charities, and I learned a great deal. In fact, I learned so much that while that neurologist who gave me those test results said there's nothing that I could do about the disease, the reality is that there's everything I can do about the disease. The problem is finding the time to do it all. So what's changed in that landscape? Well, we started to break down the pillars of neglect. Here in the USA, I was proud to help word in a small way the Ted Kennedy's Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act, the GINA Act, which was very important for us in this community. And I began the Hidden No More initiative, which has enabled the pursuit of dignity in events like one that you will see soon in some images that I'm about to show you. And that encourages a few more heads to come over the parapet, which in turn encourages engagement in science, allowing increasingly sophisticated observational trials that have been so crucial in the last decade. We also now have access to information about research which is unrivaled in any other disease. Websites like HD Buzz and a site for young people called HDEO. These social networks don't just bring people together, they collate expertise. We now have something which never existed when my mother was looking after my father at home with his disease. We have published standards of care. Patient organizations like the HDSA that we just heard about have developed from shoulders to cry on from local and national organizations to a global movement of families, support groups, and researchers. And it's so huge, it's such a global movement that in the next 12 months alone, I will speak at HD family organizations in 4 continents. These organizations melt bit by bit the fear of the disease by the power of information and integration. Those forces of trust and collaboration empower communication. Communication leads to understanding. Understanding dilutes fear, and the vacuum left by fear can be filled with hope. 25 years of watching men kill each other taught me a certain truth about them, and that is that human beings lose their moral compass, their social equilibrium, if you like, when you take 2 things away from them: dignity and hope. And in spite of being deprived of both, the Huntington's community has survived. And that's because the very best of humanity surrounds it. To illustrate that, let me show you some images from a day last year of January the 6th, Epiphany, the day for gifts in Latin America, a day when 5 families with Huntington's disease in the remotest parts of South America received, completely by surprise, red envelopes. They contained letters saying that they were to leave their villages for the first time in their lives and be taken to Rome to meet their Pope. Look and see the dignity in their eyes, a courage which makes me proud to share their genes. Well, the tale of how that extraordinary day at the Vatican unfolded was really the first happy story about this disease, the first world leader, that was, to publicly acknowledge the existence of Huntington's disease. But now we have a second happy story with, at last, a sea change in research. So, how much pharma is now involved in HD? Well, there are too many big pharma and biotechs with drugs in the pipeline for me to list them all now. Many of them are represented here tonight. I work closely with them to bring greater collaboration with the global HD community, and I can tell you this for certain, which is that because these companies have grasped the fact that investment in HD is investment in the future for all mankind's diseases, they have reached a crucial tipping point where they realize that the enemy is not each other, but Huntington's disease, and that it will likely be a combination of all their therapies that will make the difference. And because of that success, we in the patient community have reached an even more significant tipping point of our own. And that's where the future graph for HD gene carriers like me is no longer unremittingly downward. There are unknown variables ahead. And it's hard to convey the magnitude of that difference. Not just a percentage improvement, but an arithmetical absolute. The difference between nothing and the possibility of something. Between merely variations in the rate of decline to the chance that there might just be a year when the graph moves up. The difference between hope and losing the will to go on. And to illustrate that paradigm shift and the other changes since 2008 that I've just described, I'm going to tell you a story about my first HD youth summer camp back in the UK. These were people so young that they were almost children. 65 vessels of shattered dreams. It was the hardest HD event in my life. There were lots of questions, and at no point was a merely negative or helpless answer adequate. Late in the evening, when I was physically and emotionally exhausted, a girl of about 18 with haystack blonde hair sat in the chair right next to me, her eyes drained from months of tears. She said, "Tell me something you know for certain." Of all the questions asked by HD family members over more than a decade of meeting them in every corner of the world, I'd never heard one so difficult to answer. A platitude wouldn't suffice, nor a statement of which I was not 100% certain. So after a nod and a big breath, I replied, "No generation, yours included, will ever need to fear this disease as much as mine did." And the reason that I could say those words with such confidence was the tireless work and commitment of all of the people in this room. And on behalf of all of those young people around the world, thank you, and have a wonderful evening.